All right, Dan.
Yes.
Dan, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Clark, New Jersey, Union County, New Jersey, lifelong resident.
And tell me about your family. You had mom and dad growing up?
Yeah, I grew up mostly with my dad. My mom left when I was really young. I was the second born, and my mom left, I think, around 2 years old. I was about two. And she was out of my life for a good number of years, dealing with some stuff, emotional issues. And my dad raised my brother and myself. So 3 guys in the house.
Oh, how would you describe your childhood?
Very rigid. My father was of German descent. And so everything was a rule. Everything was very straightforward and strict, not a lot of emotion. But, good student, loved playing sports, but I was definitely lived in fear of my dad, no doubt.
What kind of kid were you in high school?
I was a good student. I went to church every Sunday, played sports. I loved playing sports, played baseball. But I also had this other side of me. And this other side of me that kind of loved the world of gambling. Something I got introduced to through my dad and through just growing up in the house. So I was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde, if you will.
So you're a good athlete.
Yes.
But a gambler at the same time.
Yeah, and the gambling's easy to hide. Gambling's one of those hidden addictions that if somebody doesn't know you, they can't test for it. You're not going to pee dice. There's no urine screen for it. But it was easy to hide. So, the one side of me would play sports, go to church, good student, B plus, A minus. But then the other side of me was marking cards, playing poker with my friends on Friday or Saturday night. And I was basically stealing money from them because I was marking the cards. And so there was this evil side or this dark side that kind of lurked beneath the surface.
And when did that kind of start showing its head?
I would say in high school. I grew up going to the racetrack in North Jersey, and I loved it. I loved the feeling of handicapping horses and all that. And so the friends I made in high school basically centered around gambling. I made friends with a kid whose father was a bookmaker, a bookie in New Jersey illegally. And we would go to Atlantic City. We enjoyed all the fine things, the sweets and all the foods and all that. But then I started running poker games at the local library right next to the police station. Never got caught. Started running card games. And I just started betting on sports, started handicapping, started taking people's money. So it started really early, but never at a high level. It was just always kind of bubbling below the surface. But it was something I definitely enjoyed doing.
It wasn't a problem.
It got to be a problem my senior year of high school. Senior year of high school, I had bet about $1,000 on 5 football games. And I lost every game. I went 0-5. And my dad found the betting slips. And he said, "Are these your betting slips? Did you actually gamble on these games?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "You've got a problem." He goes, "Let me know when you're fixed." And that always, I think back to that now, like, let me know when you're fixed. For people who struggle with addiction, it's not a matter of being broken or need to be fixed, right? And that was the first sign where I thought, okay, maybe I do have a problem. So I went to see a counselor. And the counselor said, "You don't have a gambling problem. You're mad at your mom for leaving you when you were young." So they kind of dismissed the gambling addiction and they focused on my relationship with my mom. So I kind of skated by on that one. It really never talked about it, but it was always bubbling below the surface.
Do you think not having your mom in your life early on was a big part of it?
Looking backwards, now that I understand the importance of childhood experiences, I would say, yes, that contributed to it. But I think it was also the early exposure. Like the Meadowlands racetrack is where I felt I bonded with my father. He worked hard and he's from German descent. So there's not a lot of I love yous or hugs, but at the racetrack, I get to see a different side of him. I got to see him smile, we would high five, we would spend time together. And for a young person who's exposed to that and they see gambling is at the center, I think that's where I kind of tucked it away and said, wow, gambling is that thing that brings families together.
It bonds you with your dad.
100%, and that's what I wanted. I'm a young person. I'm 12 years old when I first went to the racetrack with my dad. I wasn't placing bets, but I spent time with him. And I loved going there because I just loved that time we could spend together. So definitely, I think I saw it early on as a positive.
Yeah. And then after school, you got jobs?
Yeah, so in junior year of my high school, before senior year, I was actually pitching. I was a baseball player. I was scouted by the Phillies and the Reds, 2 major league teams, as well as 3 colleges, Tennessee and Knoxville, East Carolina, and NC State. And baseball was great, and I had some great advice from some of the scouts, but I didn't want to listen to them. They gave me a good piece of advice to fix my mechanics, or else I was going to have a rotator cuff injury. And I was a 17-year-old, big ego teenager, and I said, I'm fine. I haven't had an injury yet. I'm good. And 6 months later, I developed an arm problem. And my rotator cuff, I started having strains, ended up with a partial tear, ended up losing all those great opportunities. Played Division III baseball for about a month at the College of New Jersey. And then after a month, my arm gave out and my career was done. I ended up graduating with a major in finance and a minor in economics. And I got my first job over here in New York City at a tiny little investment bank named Goldman Sachs.
And you were working there for how long?
Yeah, I graduated in 1998, so I'm 46 now. I graduated in 1998, and I was there for 5 years. But during that 5-year period, things were going really well. I was involved in a really fast lifestyle, the things that I was really comfortable with. As someone who liked to gamble, I love risk-taking. I love being a part of a really high-action, high-intense environment, and that certainly did the job. But I was also downtown on September 11th when the towers were struck. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. I remember the night before, on September 10th, it was a rainy night in New York City. I was supposed to go to the Yankee game, and it got rained out. I went home that night, watched TV, went to bed, woke up the next day. It was a beautiful Tuesday morning on September 11th. And I remember going across the river, through the PATH station. I got into the towers around 6:15 in the morning when I always got into the Trade Center. I walked out of the Trade Center towards my office about a quarter mile to the east. I went to the gym like I did most mornings, and I was up in my office around 8 in the morning. About an hour later, everything changed. I remember sitting in my office and I saw a plane flying really low on the horizon, and I thought that was kind of odd. And as I'm watching the plane fly low, it kind of disappeared out of my view. And the next thing I remember was just seeing a plume of smoke. And I just couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. And I would say the next hour was a blur. I don't remember a lot of the details of the next hour, just a lot of mayhem and phone calls, and then the phone shut off and they wouldn't dial out, and people running through the office. And I remember my managing director running into my office saying, we have to go now. And I remember following him down the stairs, not knowing where we were going, thinking we were going to try to leave the city. Instead, we ended up running towards the towers. And I always say there's certain elements of life I wish I could unsee. I remember going towards the towers, and I remember from about 25, 30 feet away seeing a flash, and I saw a body hit the pavement. And I remember seeing another body hit the pavement. People started jumping out of windows because they felt that was a better alternative to what they were seeing inside. My managing director ended up losing his wife that day. I ended up losing 14 friends, as I would find out in the days and weeks that followed. That was hard. I still, to this day, get chills talking about it. The trauma lives in the body, and when you talk about things, it's hard. And I remember that next day, I finally made it home that day after September 11th, and I cried and had no more tears left. I remember on September 12th, though, the next day after September 11th, I didn't know what to do with myself. I've always been very motivated, very driven, type A self-starter. And for that first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. And I remember coming down to my living room. I was living in northern New Jersey at the time, married only a matter of a few months. And I remember opening up an online account, putting $100 into an offshore gambling site called Bodog at the time. And I remember playing blackjack for about 45 minutes. That's all. 45 minutes just to start the day. Closed the laptop down and then went about my day. I went to sit on a rock so I could see the smoke coming up from downtown New York. And I did that every day for the next several weeks. And all of a sudden, gambling started to become that thing that I did every morning to start my day for the next 8.5 years. Gambling was the thing that I used to escape September 11th.
Interesting. Probably the stress of it all, PTSD.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I had such a fond. I always knew gambling was something that I tucked away as being a good experience. So when I didn't know what to do in my life at that moment, I didn't know how to share my emotions. I grew up in a house where I didn't share emotions. I grew up in a house where it was all about the rules, not about the relationships. I grew up in a house where we didn't say, I love you and feel free to cry. It was keep it all in and just keep moving forward and work harder. And so for me, I didn't know what my outlet looked like. I didn't have experience with that. But for me, gambling was that thing that made me forget about life for a while. Just like people use drugs or alcohol. For me, it was gambling. As an athlete, someone who played sports at a high level, someone who then started to dive into the world of triathlon, swim, bike, and run, I didn't want to take things in my body that might alter my sports performance. Gambling was the thing I could find that didn't give me a hangover. Nobody could tell. I didn't have track marks. I didn't have any kind of visible impairment. And it was something I could do secretly so that I can continue to keep this image up of the successful, hardworking individual who was not impacted by September 11th. Nobody wanted to hear my problems. I was alive. I had survivor's guilt, I would come to find out. I had PTSD. I never talked to anyone about this. I didn't talk to anyone about my problems. In 2001, we didn't talk about mental health like we do today. Today, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about it. Back then, I had to put that mask on, and I wore that mask every day, and I used gambling to help me cope. And like I said, it started off playing blackjack, but then it progresses like all addictions do. Gambling is no different. The only difference with gambling is that I didn't put it in my body. It didn't go in my bloodstream. I didn't consume it. It impacted my brain though, because I needed to gamble for longer periods of time, for increasing amounts of money, and for more days during the week. Blackjack became blackjack and poker. It included sports betting. All of a sudden, I was just gambling on various things every day, every chance I could. And when I wasn't gambling, I was always thinking about when the next time I could gamble would be. I lasted in the city another 2 years. From 2001, after September 11th till 2003, I spent another 2 years at Goldman Sachs. Loved my work, but the stress was weighing on me. I remember our new building when we moved back into the city and the new location was right near a helicopter landing pad. And every time I would hear that helicopter come in for a landing, my heart rate would spike, I would get lightheaded, and I thought I'd faint because I was having those symptoms of PTSD from September 11th. I ended up leaving Goldman in 2003 to become a financial planner with Prudential in New Jersey. I couldn't work in the city anymore.
Was handling other people's money a problem?
Yeah, and I would find that out as the years rolled by. As I was slowly starting to develop this addiction to gambling, it became a problem and it gradually became a habit and forming into an addiction where I needed to just do this thing every day just to feel better. And that's how I knew I started running into a problem, but I didn't know what to do about it. What's remarkable about gambling is that every so often you actually win. And when you win, it feels really damn good. And it's hard to give something up that you know you're gonna win, but the problem is I didn't know how much I would win, how often it would happen, or when it would happen next. And that was the hook that kept me coming back to it every day. And so over time, I slowly ran through all of my savings and resources, all the restricted stock I had received from Goldman. I was at Goldman when they went public. I had a tremendous amount of stock awards. I went through all of my 401k, started going through all the savings. In June of 2008, I committed my first illegal act. And I was in charge of other people's money as a financial planner. I had a great book of clients, a lot of people that trusted me. And I remember I received a phone call from a client who had a family friend who had just received an inheritance from their uncle. And she needed some guidance on how to manage those funds. I went to the house fully anticipating just to present a few options and then just leave because I'm not a high pressure person. Here's what I would recommend. Let me know. I'll follow up in a week. That's how I always did all of my appointments. But on this particular occasion, she said, no, I want to sign up right now. I want this particular investment product. Who do I make the check payable to? And in a split second, I did not go into the house intending to do this. But when she said, who do I make the check payable to? I had just lost $8,000 before this appointment gambling online. I had someone who was going to invest $10,000 with me. That could pay off my $8,000 loss. So in a blink of an eye, I told her, you make the check payable to Dan Trolaro, my name. And she did. No questions asked. She wrote a check payable for $10,000 payable to me. I took that check, I put it in my bank account. I remember driving home at that moment saying, it just changed. I just crossed that line. I can't go back, I just crossed that line. I can't now admit what I just did because I'll be in trouble. I don't want to be in trouble. I'll figure this gambling thing out. It'll be okay. I'll repay her the money and no one will ever know. That's how it started. In my mind, I called it a loan. In the next 3 days, I turned that $10,000 into zero. I lost her $10,000. I now owed her $10,000 and I had no money to gamble with. My credit cards were maxed out and I didn't know what to do next. So I did what I thought was the next logical thing, and what people in active addiction do is they look for the way out. And my way out was to make another appointment with one of my customers who I know was very busy with life, that didn't pay close attention to their accounts. And I made a recommendation. And I started this process for the next 20 months of making appointments, stealing checks, defrauding over 12 of my customers over 20 months for over $2.1 million to fuel an ever-growing online gambling addiction. I remember when I was caught, and a few months before that, the way I was caught was November of 2009. I had made an appointment with a client, had stolen a check from them, deposited the check into my bank account in northern New Jersey, And there was a new bank teller working that day. And the individual, she just simply deposited it twice into my account, a very innocent mistake. She hit the button or she did whatever she did. So they had to reverse the transaction and they had to then put it back in the right way. But because of the magnitude and the size of the check, it was a $250,000 check. It flagged, made a red flag to the back office. And so they started investigating and researching. And what I came to learn was that launched a bit of an investigation into all of my checks and dealings with customers and with Prudential. That led to a 3-month investigation, which came to a head on February 11th of 2010, which is also the day of my last bet, February 11th, 2010. And I remember receiving a phone call from my managing director, and he said, Dan, I think we have a problem. I said, what's the problem, Bob? He said, the Prudential Home Office would like to talk to you about a $100,000 check and some other checks that you're signing from clients. Why are clients giving you checks? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I knew exactly what he was talking about. He said, I think you better come down here at 4 o'clock. There's some people that want to talk to you, including the FBI. I said, I can't make it today at 4 o'clock. He said, if you're not here at 4, we'll be to your house at 4:30. He goes, I recommend you come here. I don't think you want to make a scene. And he was right. I didn't want to make a scene. You know, at that time, I have young kids. At that time, everyone's in the dark. I'm in good standing in my community because nobody can tell if someone has a hidden gambling addiction oftentimes until it's really late. And I went down to that office on February 11, 2010. And for the next 5 hours, I sat in a room and I admitted to everything I had done. They had done their research. They had a stack of papers that were about 3 inches thick. They knew everything I had done. And I admitted and confessed to each one. They even forgot a victim that I even brought up. I needed to clear the slate. There was a point that felt really good. It felt so good to get this weight off my shoulders, but it was also really scary. And I knew it would be tremendously hard for my family, my grandparents. I was married at the time, my wife at the time, my mom, everyone. It was such a confusing element. Like, it feels so good to get this weight off your shoulders, finally to be able to breathe. But now it's like the unknown. With gambling, every day I knew what I was going to get. I knew every day I was going to wake up and gamble, and there was some comfort in that. And I knew I was going to gamble until my last dollar was gone. And there was a sense of relief when that happened. As a person with a gambling problem, whenever I had money in my account, I was always thinking about what would I gamble on? What would I bet on next? And there was this constant preoccupation. I couldn't be a good father. I couldn't be a good husband. I couldn't be a good community member. I couldn't be a good friend. I just wanted to gamble and think about gambling every waking hour. But when that last dollar was gone, there was a sense of relief. And this was that similar sense of relief. All the garbage is now out there. For the next 18 months, the wheels of justice turned very slowly. From February 11th of 2010 until August 19th of 2011, I waited 18 months before I was sentenced to 6 years state prison. I admitted to everything I had done. Prudential made all of the victims whole, and that helped tremendously in my case. Prudential repaid all of the victims of my criminal activity, and I'm very thankful for that. None of those people deserved any of what I had done. They came across me at a time in my life when I was going through terrible addiction. I should have addressed it. I should have addressed September 11th. There's just so many layers to it, looking backwards now. That can't be fixed, but I'm thankful that Prudential reimbursed them. I remember getting sentenced on August 19, 2011. I remember some of the hardest days of my life was going through September 11th, and then at the time telling my twins, I had boy-girl twins, telling them when they were 6 years old that Daddy was going on a business trip, and I didn't know when I'd be back. That was hard. I was thankful that I wasn't gone for the full 6 years. Between incarceration, being away, I was at a work camp, I was on a supervised release program, I was on parole, probation for about 4.5 years total in the system. I remember getting out and kind of getting off the program completely in 2000, I guess that'd be 2015, 2016 timeframe. It felt so good to be free again. No restrictions. I had taken that time to work on myself. I knew I couldn't gamble. I know I don't have a healthy relationship with gambling. If I want to be a good person and a good human being, I know I can't gamble. It doesn't work in my life. I don't know what moderation is. I don't understand I don't even want to be a part of gambling, but I want to be a part of the solution. And I want to be a part of helping people who struggle with life, people who struggle with drugs, alcohol, gambling, stress, whatever it is. I knew I like people. I like working with people. I like talking with people. I like relating to people. And having prison experience and being a person with an addiction, because I'm a person first. And that's the one thing I always remind people that I talk to. We are people first. We're a person with an addiction. And when we talk to people in recovery, when we talk to the family members, love the person, but you don't love their behavior. And that is something I echo all the time for anyone who struggles with addiction. We love the person, but we don't love that behavior. And then we have to separate the two. I knew when I came out, I wanted to help people who might struggle with gambling. And so coming out of prison was hard, because the first job I had was working at a little mom and pop barbecue restaurant in northern New Jersey, making $5 an hour, serving pork sandwiches, barbecue pork sandwiches. And I remember going to work in the morning. My youngest daughter at the time would see me put on my gray shirt with a little picture of a pig. And it said, something like, "We make pigs fly," whatever it was, something silly. And she would always say, "Daddy, you going to work at the piggy place?" That's what she would always say. And it was humbling, yet it was just a reminder of where I was. And I said, "Yep, going to work, I'll be home later." I didn't get upset. There's no time for that. And so I would just do what I had to do. And then I started moving through, and I was blessed with an opportunity to speak to a couple of groups who were Gamblers Anonymous Fellowship. I joined that, speaking in some outpatient groups, just kind of start giving back, volunteering my time. And then as gambling expanded in New Jersey in 2013 through 2018, internet gambling, sports betting, I was blessed with an opportunity to work for a nonprofit to help educate and reduce the risk of gambling harm in the state of New Jersey. And I ended up becoming the assistant executive director over the last several years there before leaving for a new opportunity. That was 1 year ago, where I joined Epic Risk Management as the head of prevention in the United States, working primarily with the NCAA and college student athletes to reduce gambling harm. Gambling is growing, and I want to be a part of the solution so that other people don't feel that they have to hide or don't feel that they don't have someone to talk to. So we go around to different colleges all around the country, engaging student athletes, sharing my lived experience and my story in hopes that it resonates and might make a difference in someone's life.
It's nice to hear that you've taken like 100% responsibility for what you did.
Yeah, I can easily look backwards and say, oh, if it's my dad's fault or it's my mom's fault for leaving or whatever it might be, but that's not the case. We have the power to make choices. In the midst of an addiction, when I was going through the deepest throes of addiction, yeah, my brain was hijacked in the midst of that, but I have choices. I take ownership. There was a lot of things that I could have done differently. When I look backwards, and you can't fix the past, but when I look backwards, I immediately should have taken advantage of services and any resources that were available for people who were downtown on September 11th. I chose not to. And some of that is a function of your upbringing and your culture, right? How do I know how to share my feelings if I've never seen it modeled? I didn't see my parents married. I never saw arguments. I never saw conversation and communication. I didn't know how that stuff worked. So there's a part of it that'll say, if I'm never taught how to do something, or if I don't develop a life skill, how do I then go ahead and develop that? And I pushed people away. There was a lot where I wanted to live this Jekyll and Hyde life. I had this ego. I had this competitive spirit. I wanted to do everything bigger than everyone else. I mean, that's part of my personality trait. In the midst of my gambling, I had to have, if my friends had bet $100, I had to bet $500. If they ordered one dinner, I had to order two. I mean, I always had to one-up somebody else. And you look at some of the personality traits for people who struggle with addiction specific to gambling, and it's that competitive drive. It's that fear of failure. It's that risk-taking mentality, all of which has just been a part of my life. It's part of my DNA. And that's why addiction is so complex. Right? It's biology, it's genetics, it's who you grow up around, who you make friends with. But I do take ownership. I take ownership because I need to do that for myself so that I can forgive myself as well, in that I'm a flawed human being. I'm going to make mistakes every day. I hurt people along the way. I asked forgiveness from a lot of people, some of which I didn't get, but that's out of my control. And I think about that serenity prayer all the time, of kind of separating, knowing what we can control and knowing what's out of our control, having that wisdom to know the difference between the two. But I had to take ownership. I mean, it starts with taking ownership and accepting accountability and responsibility, and then finding a sense of usefulness and purpose in my life, which was lacking for so long. I had so much shame and so much guilt. Until I was able to start talking about it, it started freeing me from that mental prison that I was struggling in.
Yeah, gambling's an interesting addiction. I went to a couple gambling anonymous meetings in Vegas when I was there once, looking for gamblers to interview, and it's very difficult because they don't want to talk typically. But
yeah,
one of the things I heard in the meetings over and over again was from the gamblers is, I have an off switch, but I don't have I have an on switch, but I don't have an off switch.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I often hear people talk about that. I've even heard renowned doctors talk about that. Once the addiction switch is on, it stays on. And that's across the board for all addictions. You know, what's interesting with gambling is what I mentioned before, is the fact that it's hard to stop an activity where you're getting rewarded every so often. And if you look, the brain of a person with a gambling problem lights up in the similar regions as someone who has a cocaine addiction. Mm-hmm. The similar areas are activated. And so all of a sudden, I'm not putting anything in my body, yet I'm getting such a buzz and such a high off this behavioral process. So it impacts the brain. And it's not just the winning, because gambling, a lot of people think gambling is a money problem. Gambling's an emotional problem. People with gambling problems are either using it for action or escape. You know, I started as an action gambler. I loved the rush. But after September 11th, I became an escape gambler because I didn't know how to deal with life.
Is it the adrenaline of the risk?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. It's the dopamine boost that you keep getting in that adrenaline. It's the anticipation as well as the participation. So it's thinking about what the next bet will be, thinking about what the outcome will be, and also then actively watching it take place. So if you're wagering on the internet or betting on sports, nowadays you can bet on sports. You can put a new bet every 20 seconds. You can bet on the next serve in a tennis match, the next pitch in a baseball game. So to like get that granular with it, I'm anticipating what it will be. I'm hoping for a good outcome. If it happens, great, it registers and I move on to the next one. But if it doesn't, I'm still buzzing. I'm still feeling really high and I'm just gonna move on to the next one anyway. So either way, I'm getting an adrenaline rush and a dopamine hit.
Because you work in prevention or recovery of gambling, I mean, what kind of numbers do you know about how common it is?
So here's a couple of issues in the United States with gambling, is that there's no federal funding to support treatment or prevention. We have funding for drug and alcohol prevention and treatment and services. There's no federal funding for gambling. It's all done at the state level. So the research is limited, but the latest research estimates that roughly 2% of Americans have a full-blown gambling disorder. Now, from a percentage perspective, that's not a lot. But if you think about how many people in the United States, 3 billion people in the United States, 2%, what that's 600,000 people or something like that, I think the numbers are growing. Oh, actually, no, it'd be higher than that. It'd be like 6 million people.
6 million.
6 million. So the numbers are growing though, and here's where we're starting to see concern. Since 2018, sports betting is now starting to become legalized state by state. PASPA was repealed. It allowed each state to decide how and if they want to enforce, regulate, and govern sports betting within its own state borders. New Jersey was one of the first ones to market with that. What we saw in New Jersey, people calling 800 Gambler Helpline, the number of people with sports betting related problems ballooned from 4% annually up to about 16% annually, fourfold increase. So we're starting to see more people starting to exhibit gambling related harms. We're also pushing it out to the younger demographic. Our college students, people in high school who shouldn't even be gambling yet are partnering with their older siblings or parents and placing bets on sporting contests. We're normalizing the expansion of gambling amongst our youth. I anticipate we're going to see those numbers grow as time goes on. That's why we have to get into the schools at an early age. Prevention's all about starting soon. You know, schools allocate funding for prevention for drug and alcohol. But when you talk about gambling, it's just not a problem that they see, because you can't see a gambling problem that well. Yet we know people walk around struggling with gambling addiction, and it's the loved ones who also suffer, because gambling has some of the largest financial consequences of the major addictions, as well as some of the highest suicidal ideation and attempt.
Yeah, it's an interesting addiction.
I'm thankful I think about the suicide piece. That's something that never crossed my mind. And I've lost friends since September 11th, when I lost a lot of friends. I lost 2 more to suicide after September 11th. They couldn't deal with life. And then along my journey of recovery in the last 12 years, I've lost friends to suicide from gambling addiction because they just can't take it anymore. And I remember one in particular I was at a meeting in North Jersey some number of years ago on July 3rd, the night before Independence Day. And I remember this young man was a Wall Street executive like myself, in recovery, was struggling, was still living at home, couldn't move out because he had no money left. And he grew up in a family where they gambled every Friday night. So he's at a GA meeting trying to get well, and he would go home to an environment where they were playing poker. And it was a family where it was the father, the uncle, his siblings, and every time he'd come in, they'd say, come on, sit down, you're playing. And they'd force him at the table. He couldn't take it anymore. And he ended up taking his own life on July 4th. And I remember him talking about giving his therapy that night, talking about freedom from addiction and independence. And he says, I think there's only one way I can get free of this thing. And I just remember that. None of us knew at the time that he was talking about completing suicide. But looking backwards, that's probably what he was referring to. That was hard.
And Dan, what would you say is the most important thing you've learned from all of this?
I'm thankful. I think coming out of September 11th, having opportunities in my life from baseball to working in the city to meeting just amazing people every day and hearing what people can accomplish with what little they have at times, I think I'm just thankful. I think we need to really work on listening more than we speak. That's something, I'm here talking with you today, but it's something I really try to do because people just want a voice. They want to be heard and they want to have an outlet. And that's something that I realized that I don't think I had. So I try to give that. I try to give more compassion versus comparison. That's a big thing that I focus on today. When we talk about social media and the age of technology, we see so many people falling for that comparison model. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not as good as blank, right? Comparing yourself to someone else, letting people know that you are worthy. You do deserve to be here. You are right where you're supposed to be in this moment. And just trying to work with people to help give them hope and encouragement. One of the things I realized, I was very thankful that I was reconnected with my higher power, spending time back in the church, something my grandparents instilled in me at an early age, but I always revolted against. It was confusing to me. I didn't want to be a part of religion. I didn't want anything to do with religion. But what I realized over time, and one of my biggest takeaways, is that it's not religion, it's a relationship. And in recovery from addiction, we need to form relationships. Because when we're in active addiction, we want isolation. Relationship is the furthest thing from our mind when we're in active addiction because of the shame and stigma. So today, as I go around the country and as I work in the field that I do, and I'm very blessed and thankful for that, I help people focus on relationship, help people realize that they are good enough and they're worthy enough, and that it's okay to not be okay, and just always have a trusted friend by their side.
Excellent, Dan. What a great talk. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm glad you're doing better.
Thank you.
Thank you.